أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ورضي الله تعالى عن السادة التابعين وعلماء العاملين وأئمة الأربعة المجتهدين ومقلدين إلى يوم الدين أما بعد وقال المؤلف رحمه الله والمختار للمغرب قدر ما تصلى فيه بعد شروطها والمختار للعشاء من مغيب الشفق إلى ثلث الليل الأول وضروريهما إلى طلوع الفجر والمختار للصبح من الفجر إلى الإسفار الأعلى وضروريه إلى طلوع الشمس والقضاء في جميع ما وراء ذلك ومن أقر صلاة حتى خرج وقتها فعليه ذنب عظيم إلى أن يكون ناسيا أو نائما. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Alhamdulillah wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all of you who preceded me in the greetings. Alhamdulillah, this is, our regular Maliki Fiqh class that we do after Maghrib every Monday through Thursday. Well, alhamdulillah, yesterday's lesson was, we were dealing with awqatu salat, the times of prayer. And we're still in that section. It's important that if you didn't get yesterday's class, that you listen to that or take your note, get back to your notes regarding that, because I'm sure there are a lot of things in here or in this section that a lot of us are not familiar with if we hadn't studied properly before. So there are a lot of terms that we mentioned, introduced yesterday, such as mukhtar and daruri and other terms. So it's important that you listen to that class and so that you can get a complete understanding of this class. So we picked up where we left off at. The author said, the mukhtar time for Maghrib is determined by the time it takes to perform it after its preconditions, its shurut, have been fulfilled. In other words, unlike other schools, in the Maliki school, for the mukhtar time, there's no specific, definite time for the mukhtar time. It's more like an estimate. And so the estimated time is the time it takes for you to fulfill the conditions, which is actually the next chapter, meaning make sure the time it takes for you to get in the state of purity, the time it takes for you to determine which way the Qibla is, and those things, and cover yourself properly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and the time to actually make the prayer. That's the mukhtar time. That's the preferred, that's the first time, or the time that is the time in which you should make it. I'm going to mention it later, closer to the end of this section, but unlike other schools, there's no nafila, there's no non-obligatory prayers that are made from the time you make asr all the way until the time you make maghrib. So in other words, I'm choosing my words carefully. From the time you make asr all the way up until the time you perform salatul maghrib. In other words, there's no nafila, there's no sunnah between the adhan of maghrib and maghrib. And if you go to other places, for example, places that are, pretty much culturally, Maliki, if that makes sense, right? You will notice in those masajid that when it's time for Maghrib, the adhan is called, and then straight away they go and pray Maghrib. You don't even have time to make two sunnahs or nawafil, right? But anyway, continuing. So, like in other schools, for example, they say from that Maghrib is in, or the Mukhtar of Maghrib is in into the Shafaq or the twilight, the redness in the sky disappears. For us, shorter than that. Is only enough time it takes you to fulfill the conditions and perform it. That's it. After that is Dorori time. And then he says, the preferred time or the Mukhtar time for Isha, the night prayer, is from the disappearance of the Shafaq, the twilight, or the redness in the sky, up until the end of the first third of the night. And so you're going to say, okay, how do you calculate the first third of the night? It's pretty easy. For us here right now, we can almost do it literally using the real times. Because if you think about it, right? For example, in Pittsburgh, Maghrib comes in roughly 6 o'clock. Fajr comes in roughly 6 o'clock. Not exactly, but roughly 6 o'clock, right? It's 12 hours. So it's easy to do the math. So when you calculating the night and you're trying to break it up into threes, right? Into thirds, right? That's the space of time that you're using to measure. So when Maghrib comes in, it's when Fajr comes in, right? So it's 12 hours. 12 divided by 3 is what? 4. So from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock is the first third of the night. So we said that the Mukhtar time for Maghrib is only the amount of time that it takes for you to fulfill the conditions and make the salah. Then after that, that's the end of the Mukhtar time for Maghrib. Now is Dururi time for Maghrib. Follow? These times that he's given are the extent of those times, right? So that's the end of the Mukhtar time. Now, when that Shafaq, when that twilight leaves the sky, the Mukhtar time for Isha is in. And for us here, the time, the length of time for Maghrib is going to vary depending on where you at. For us, is not a long time from the time the sun sets up until the time the redness disappears from the sky. A little less than an hour here. Other places are different, right? Some places a lot longer, some places maybe even shorter, right? So when the twilight disappears, then it's Isha time. And so the Mukhtar time for Isha is from the time it comes in to the first third of the night. So I'm going to say it again because you might get confused because Isha, right, obviously comes in after Maghrib. But you're trying to figure out, well, what's the first third of the night? The way you're going to calculate that is you're going to start from Maghrib time and go all the way up until when Fajr comes in. And then you break that up into thirds. And for us right now, this time of year is roughly about 12 hours. So 12 divided by 3 is 4. So each third of the night is about 4 hours. And so for us, the first third of the night will be up until about 10 o'clock. And that will be the Mukhtar time for Isha. So when Isha comes in, you should be making it from about the time it comes in, and for us, that's roughly about 7 o'clock, right? Up until about 10 o'clock. After that, it's the Dorori time. It's the necessary time. And as we said yesterday, the Dorori time is you shouldn't be praying in that time unless you have an excuse. You overslept, you fainted, you're a woman and you just came clean and you purified yourself with ghusl, and that happens to be in the Dorori time. These are excuses, all right? So he continues. The daruri time, or the necessary time for both of them, meaning Maghrib and Isha, lasts until Fajr. Now, pay attention to the words, because in our school, you find that the word used for the morning prayer is not Fajr, it's Subh. It's the word that's used for the morning prayer, Subh. The word Fajr is used for the first part of that prayer time, meaning the first light, dawn. A lot of times, most of us, when we teach in this part of the world, we use both words because we know people are more used to the word Fajr. So usually when I'm talking or teaching or trying to indicate that prayer, I usually say Subh Fajr. I don't just say Fajr, because in this society, we're really like, like robotic. When you introduce something new, what's wrong? You making something up. It's a bid'ah, billah, right? It's bad. I never heard. Why is it bad? Because I never heard of it before, right? That's how we are. So, I don't do that. Even though I know people are not used to it, I keep mentioning it over and over and over again until it becomes normal. So when he says the dururi time for Isha, meaning it lasts from after the first third of the night all the way up until when Fajr first comes in, or when Subha first comes in. And that part is called Fajr. So you overslept, for example. Let's say you overslept. Asr came in. You made Asr for whatever reason, and then you went to sleep. But then you woke up at 12 o'clock at night. And all of us have different work schedules. Everybody's not working 9 to 5 no more. Everybody's hours is all over the place. So this is a real scenario, right? You went to sleep after Asr, and you woke up at 12 o'clock. Oh, I missed Maghrib. No, you didn't. It's still in. The Dururi time is in. You good. You can wake up and make Maghrib, and you can make Isha, and you make both of those prayers inside of their proper time. It's not the Mukhtar time for Maghrib, but it's the Dururi time for Maghrib. And you're not sinful because you were sleeping. You were unconscious. It's not your fault. So just like Dhuhr, the Dururi time goes into Asr, it's the same thing with Maghrib. Maghrib, the Dururi time for Maghrib goes into Isha. So as the way I like to describe it is the prayer times overlap into each other. Up until, I learned properly, I always thought that one prayer comes in, then the prayer goes out, and then the next prayer comes in, then the next prayer goes out. No Mukhtar, no Dururi, no nothing, just in, out, and certain prayers have little time periods in between it when you can't pray, like when the sun is actually setting and when the sun is actually rising, and when Fajr goes out, there's this space of time where there's no obligatory prayers until after that. That's the way I thought. So, but it's not the case. The time for Dhuhr actually goes inside of the time for Asr, and the time for Maghrib actually goes inside of the time for Isha, at least the Dururi time. And then he said, the Mukhtar time for Subha is from dawn, in other words, until Fajr, from Fajr, until its first brightening, until Isfar, first brightening. So in a lot of places, especially like in the northern parts, if you're staying up at night and you're waiting for Fajr or Subha to come in, usually they have what's called, depending on where you at, what's called false Fajr. Meaning you'll see a light and the light will come like straight up. They describe it like the English letter L or even the Arabic letter L, like a lamp. It just go like vertically up and then it'll go down. That's not the light of Fajr. That's not Subha. Don't go for that. That's the okie doke. Play basketball, that's the fake out. Don't go for the fake, right? Don't go for the fake. The light of Fajr or Subha, right? You'll see the sky gradually change from black to dark blue, right? And it won't just shoot straight up. You just see in the eastern sky, the sky gradually changing, and then the light slowly spreading. So that's when Subha comes in, and up until the time it says bright, meaning the sky is clearly light, and it's light enough that if we were outside and there were no street lights or nothing out, and I looked at you from a regular distance, I can see your face. I can make out your face. And then it says the necessary time for Subha lasts until sunrise. So in other words, from the time that it's getting light and I can just start to make out your face, up until the time that you start, the sun actually rises. You can see the top of the sun coming from the horizon. Then that's the rest of that between those two times, that's the Dururi time. Prayers are considered late and must be made up after all of these aforementioned times. And the word for that is qada. In other words, Mukhtar time passed, Dururi the time didn't pass, the prayer went out, it's qada, it's late, you got to make it up. It says, whoever delays the salat until its time passes incurs a great sin, except for the one who forgets or oversleeps. Because the Prophet ﷺ taught us that the pen is lifted on the one who doesn't have his intellect. In other words, if he is asleep or he forgets, you honestly forget. It's not your fault, right? But anybody else who delays the prayer without any excuse is sinful. And then he says, وَلَا تُصَلَّى نَافِلَةٌ بَعْدَ صَلَاةِ الصُّبْحِ إِلَى ارْتِفَاعِ الشَّمْسِ وَبَعْدَ صَلَاةِ الْعَصْرِ إِلَى صَلَاةِ الْمَغْرِبِ وَبَعْدَ طُلُوعِ الْفَجْرِ إِلَّا الْوِرْدَ لِنَائِمٍ عنه وعند جلوس إمام الجمعات على المنبر وبعد الجمعات حتى يخرج من المسجد. He said, there is no nafila, and again, nafila is referring to every non-obligatory prayer, right? There is no nafila salat. And what he means here by there is no, meaning it is makruh. Remember, we keep making reference back to these 5 legal judgments, obligatory, recommended, permissible, disliked, and haram. What he means here by there is no salat, meaning it's makruh, meaning you get a reward if you stay away from it. You get a reward if you don't do it. However, if you do it, there is not necessarily a sin on you. So he said there is no nafila salat after subha salat until after the sun has risen high. What that means is during the time when subha comes in, right, the prayer we know is fajr, when that comes in, the only prayers you should be making is those 2 highly recommended sunnah. And in our school, right, this you got to be careful when you're talking, right? When our school, when we're talking about those prayers, right, those morning prayers, and we say fajr, we're talking about those sunnah prayers. And when we say subha, we're talking about the fard prayer, the obligatory prayer. So if you're talking to a Maliki and he says, did you make fajr yet? He's asking you, did you make the sunnahs, the nafila that you do before the obligatory? And he said, okay, well, let's make subha now. Since you made your fajr, let's make subha, right? So right? So he says, so those are the only two prayers we should be making, those highly recommended prayers and those obligatory prayers. So after the subha salah, it is makruh to make any other type of sunnah or anything like that, right? Until after the sun has risen high. So in other words, when the sun has risen all the way, right? Let me stop. While the sun is rising, it's haram to pray. What he's talking about now is when it's makruh to pray. You shouldn't pray. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, but before the sun has completely risen, in other words, you can see the top of the sun is coming up, right? It's haram to pray during that time. It's haram. Meaning you're sinful if you do it. Now the sun is up. All of the sun is up. You can see the whole sun. You still shouldn't pray. If you want to make any other type of sunnah, you wait a little bit more. So the sun is like, it looks almost similar to the way it looks when Asr is going out. Like it's deep yellow. You can actually look at it and not hurt your eyes and stuff. When it starts to get bright and it's a little higher, it's hard to look at it, becomes more white, then that's actually the time that you can make duha time. Then you can pray. Duha is a early morning sunnah or nafila or non-obligatory prayer that is highly recommended to make, right? So while the sun is rising, it's haram to pray. After the sun has risen, it's makruh to pray until you give it some time to rise a little bit more. So that's one time that he mentions that it is makruh to pray. And then he mentions another time. He says, after the Asr prayer until the time of Maghrib, well, until Maghrib, right? So as I mentioned earlier, after the Asr prayer, all the way until the time you make the actual Maghrib prayer. So that includes coming into the masjid, making two rakats, tahiyatul masjid, and other things, right? And then he mentions another time. Oh, and yeah, I mentioned that already. Like there's no sunnah. Other schools differ, but there's no sunnah between the adhan and the iqamah of Maghrib. Then he says, after the appearance of Fajr, except for the weird, for one who overslept. And what's meant by weird, those of us who, embrace all of Islam, we're familiar with that word. When I say all of Islam, we don't have a problem with tasawwuf. And we're, a lot of times we're part of Sufi orders, like us, we're Akhdari. And so usually if you're part of a Sufi order, you have a weird that you do. Set of litanies, du'a, supplication that you do at prescribed times, right? But that's not what's meant here. The same word is used, but that's not what's meant here. What's meant here actually is maybe you have some type of night prayers that you normally do all of the time, right? But you went to sleep and you woke up and subha is already in, meaning fajr is already in. If you normally do those night prayers and you overslept for some reason, you can wake up and do those prayers if that's your normal practice, right? If that's your normal practice, you can do that. And but other than that, if that's not what you normally do, it's makruh for you to be doing that during that time. Then he said, Nafila Salah is also not done when the Imam of Jummah sits on the minbar. And after the Jummah Salah itself, until one leaves the masjid. And so what this means is that unlike other schools like the Shafi'i school, right, when the Imam stands on a minbar, right, and you come in Jummah late, that means if you just come in when the Imam stood on the minbar, you're actually late, right? But you come at that time and you make 2 rakats, giving greetings to the masjid, right? We don't do that in our school. Once the Imam stands on the minbar, and well, more technically speaking, when he's walking to the minbar, right, you shouldn't make any sunnah. You shouldn't make any nafila. You just sit down. And one of the proofs that's mentioned for this is taken from the Muwatta of Imam Malik, and I'll just mention it here. In the commentary it says, في مواتر مالك أنا ابن شهاب قال فخروج الإمام يقطع الصلاة وكلامه يقطع الكلام. He said, Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri is one of the big scholars in Fuqaha of Medina who Imam Malik took from, but he says, the coming out of the Imam puts an end to all salah, puts an end to salah. And the speech of and his speech, meaning the khutbah, puts an end to all kalam. And when you actually look in the Muwatta and you find this hadith, you're going to see some other hadith in the same chapter. And they mention how during the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second rightly guided Khalifa, that they literally, like when Umar would come out to give the khutbah, all nafila prayers would stop, but they would still be talking amongst themselves. And then when he said assalamu alaikum, then they would stop talking. All right. So alhamdulillah. And there's other proofs and other reasons for that. And also he mentioned that it is also makruh to make sunnah until he leaves. Meaning it's better to make your sunnah at home after Jummah instead of in the masjid. And then the scholars go into more detail. They say that if you want to make sunnah in the masjid, you should wait till the imam leaves the masjid. But it's better for you and the imam and everybody to make their sunnah after Jummah in your home and not in the masjid itself. And so that's the end of that chapter. Are there any questions? Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Isa. Alhamdulillah. Now I wish I gotta get ready for the Black Imams Roundtable. Imam Fahim and Imam Amin are talking about, making me pay late fees. I'm like, what about push-ups? I can do push-ups. Do push-ups. I know there's a delay for everybody listening online, so I'm just waiting to see if anyone has any questions. And I know not everybody types at the same speed. Alhamdulillah. Afwan, Sister Sophia, alhamdulillah. These classes, I may get more benefit from it than y'all, because it's like, you learn the book and then you teach the book, and then, so it's a review for me, so I love it. And I'm not a scholar, so, as I'm teaching and preparing for classes, I'm learning as well. Alhamdulillah, looks like there's no questions. So I will log out, and I hope to see all of you on the Black Imams Roundtable on Masjid Muhammad of Atlantic City's platform at 7 o'clock, inshallah, which is about 13 minutes. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. And I want you to recite Surah Al-Fatiha and ask Allah to give the reward of that recitation to the author of this book, Sheikh Abdul Rahman al-Akhdari. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.